A Traveller's Guide to the Forgotten Realms, Episode 12, The Road to Kheldell and the Rules of Magic. A letter from Falrien Sunesson to Lord Sandrier of Silvery Moon. My dear Lord Sandrier, it has been 10 days since the beekeepers, and 9 since we saw another traveller upon the road. In that time, we've seen deer, trees, rain, squirrels, more deer, trees and rain, and little else beside the long and wearying business of keeping wagons moving through the country. The country that seems determined to resist the notion. I do not mind admitting that by the end of it, I'd become intensely bored, beyond endurance. Not frightened, amusingly, though Kryptgarden never released its hold upon my mind, nor on the minds of the others in our little caravan, nor especially miserable, though we had more than our fair share of wet cloaks, cold fingers, ill-tempered wheels, and food that seems to have given up on being food and just settled for being simple nourishment. I'm just bored. Bored in the peculiarly wearying fashion known only to travellers obliged to endure too much of the same hardship for too long. For 9 days we picked our way south through that narrow and unrelenting strip of land between the mountains and the vast brooding mass of the forest. The rain came often, though not as frequently as it likely did on the other side of the mountains, and when it did not, the ground clung jealously to any water it could find. Wheels sank, harnesses strained, tempers grew short. The forest remained to our left, never quite far enough to let us forget, and never near enough to become a problem. The stress of the forest at our near side never faded, but it just became a part of daily life. From time to time, once or twice a day, someone would catch some movement at the edge of sight and call a halt. Weapons would be hastily drawn, the beast secured, and every eye would turn in silence toward the trees. Then nothing would happen, and we'd move on. All night, every night, all manner of creatures could be heard calling from the woods. On the 3rd or 4th night, I confess I'm no longer certain, a shape crossed the moon, a strange cross, casting us all into darkness for a heartbeat that felt like a 10-day. We did not sleep well after that. A number of my companions mentioned the name Gnawbone. The tressym, at least, have settled into caravan life with an ease that I find faintly insulting. One of them, a little smoke-grey male monster, has taken a liking to me and would perch on my shoulder uninvited whenever I paused long enough to be caught. Another seems to take great delight in stealing whatever Miri most wished to preserve in the moment. A third developed the phenomenal habit of waking Corvan in the blackest hour before dawn, settling upon his chest and kneading, staring into his face until the captain frequently cursed himself awake. This, I confess, I find indecently restorative to my spirits. Miri has begun training them with the brisk seriousness of a general preparing light cavalry. Corvan insists that they are winged vermin with delusions of nobility. Nhalis claims indifference, which might have been more convincing had I not twice seen a pair asleep inside her cloak. Other than the tressym, however, there was little to distinguish one day from the next. It's a strange thing, the boredom of the road. One imagines that travelling through dangerous country must be a constant state of alertness. Sharp eyes, tight fingers, a hand never far from the sword. In truth, much of this journey seems to be waiting for things not to happen, waiting for wheels to survive a particularly rutted area, waiting for the rain not to worsen, waiting for the forest to not disgorge some terrible beast in our path, waiting for the next camp, the next meal, the next fallen tree across the road. I cannot express the heartbreaking frustration of seeing yet another enormous tree athwart our path. And then, when nothing does happen, one begins to almost shamefully resent the safety, because at least an end to safety would be interesting. By the 4th day after leaving the beekeepers, I'd counted the same crack in the rear board of Miri's wagon 97 times. By the 5th, I'd composed 3 verses of a song about Corvan's hat, none of which I dared sing, and by the 6th, I found myself watching Nhalis with a degree of attention that might have been considered impolite had it not become scholarly. You will remember Nhalis, I hope, the air genasi travelling with us, white-haired to the point of translucency, pale-skinned and possessed of the curious manner of one only partially committed to gravity. Her hair moves about her, even when the air is still, and her voice carries a lilt that makes almost every sentence seem a question. Until this latest tortuous stretch of the road, I'd understood her chiefly as a useful oddity, a happenstance journeyman wizard travelling with Corvan Pell's company, paid a modest sum to provide protective magics while she continues south to a new school. But boredom is a surprisingly sharp tutor. Deprived of novelty, the mind begins to study what remains, and so I studied Nhalis. Not too rudely, I hope. Not mostly. She dried what needed drying, though usually not quite as completely as one might wish. She would coax damp kindling into flame with a flick of 2 fingers and a muttered phrase. She set alarms about her camp at night, and she once mended a split strap just well enough that Miri could properly repair it later. More than once, she directed smoke out from beneath the canvas so we might eat without weeping into our stew. None of these workings was particularly grand, but each one mattered, and that was perhaps what caught my attention. You see, I've lived most of my life among the faithful. To those raised around temples, power is usually discussed in terms of grace, petition, blessing, office, or similar. The gods answer or they do not. A priest may serve as a vessel, a voice, or a hand, or servant of a will beyond herself. Alas, Lady Firehair never saw fit to bless me thus. Nhalis does not appear to be asking anyone for anything. This became clearest on the 5th wet evening after we left the beekeepers. We'd made camp early, after one wheel having sunk to the axle in soft ground. By the time it was freed, the horses were steaming, Corvan was swearing in 3 languages, and Miri had acquired a smear of mud along one cheek that made her look warlike and unusually pleased with herself. Nhalis, meanwhile, was about her normal task whenever we set camp, kneeling beside a line of fine silver cord, casting her alarm spells to protect us from intruders. I watched her tie a knot, ring a tiny bell, and speak a word that was not in any tongue I know. The air seemed to tighten for a moment. Just for a moment, every hair along my arms lifted. She noticed me watching and, scowling, told me to ask my questions. When I asked what it was, she answered without looking up, an alarm. I told her I knew that. She told me that before, but what I meant was, what was it? She paused then, turned her head a little toward me. That, she said, is a much worse question. Naturally, I joined her. What followed was not exactly a lesson. Nhalis would almost certainly deny delivering one, I think, and would probably object to the words on grounds of dignity. It was more an interrogation conducted over several miserable, boring days, interrupted by rain, stuck wheels, and poor footing. I therefore arranged her answers more neatly than she gave them, partly for your benefit, partly for mine, and partly for posterity. The first thing she made clear is that a spell is not simply a wish, a prayer, or a burst of will. A spell, especially in terms of wizards, is a method by which a caster shapes magic through the weave. The weave, as she explained it, is how mortals touch magic without being destroyed by it. Raw magic is not safe. It is not a tool waiting politely on a table. The weave orders it, carries it, limits it, and makes spellcasting possible for mortals. All true spellcasting touches the weave, she said, quite emphatically, but not all spellcasters touch it by the same means. That distinction matters. A wizard learns the patterns by which the weave may be shaped. Words matter, gestures, materials, memory and discipline matter, sometimes a little, sometimes fatally. A priest may be granted authority through a god, an oath, or divine favour. Their magic may still move through the weave, but the authority by which it moves is not the same as a wizard's. A druid, ranger, or servant of the green powers may come to it through nature, spirit, old pact, or divine service to the wild. I'll probably write more on this, I suspect, when we come nearer the old woods and hopefully some servants of the wild. A sorcerer bears the some route to magic inwardly, through blood, ancient accent, blessing, or just some curiosity in their nature. The power is not first learned from a book nor granted through prayer, it is already there, pressing outward. A warlock reaches power by bargain, and a bard, and here Nhalis glared at me again, may reach it through art, rhythm, memory, and the strange old power of song. The result may look similar from outside, light, flame, healing, ward, thunder, but the mechanism is not the same. That, I think, is where many of us go wrong. We see the effect and assume the cause. Most common folk speak of magic as though it were a single thing. Magic lights a candle, raises the dead. Magic raises a castle into the air, lets a message cross 100 miles, or, in my case, keeps a sword bright after 5 centuries buried in a ruin. But to speak that way is a little like saying that all things done with the hand are the same because each involves fingers. Nhalis was quite firm on this. Magic is not one thing simply because the ignorant give it one name, she said. When I asked whether ignorant was necessary, she replied that it frequently was. I chose not to contest the point. This perhaps naturally led me on to discussing Mystra. Here, Nhalis became more careful, as though she had stepped from mere technique into sacred territory and was not comfortable admitting it. Mystra, the Lady of Mysteries, the mother of all magic, our Lady of Spells, is not merely a goddess who approves nor patronizes wizards in the way that Ogma watches knowledge or Suni observes beauty. She is the Lady of Mysteries, the keeper of the weave, its steward. In some sense, although Nhalis advised me not to push the point too crudely, its living embodiment. The present weave is Mystra's, not Mistral's. Not exactly. You see, before Mystra, before the current Mystra, there was Mistril, an older and ancient goddess of magic born at the beginning of time, and every wizard learns her name sooner or later. Usually, Nhalis told me, around the same time that they learn the name of Karsus. They know the name, of course. Every educated person knows it. Karsus of Netheril, Karsus the Mighty, Karsus the Momentary God, the Arcanist whose ambition broke an empire. But Nhalis spoke the name without romance. He tried to take divinity by spellwork. Not symbolically, not ceremonially, he shaped a spell to seize the power of a god, and chose Mistral herself. For a moment, depending on which account one believes, he succeeded, and that was the problem. No mortal mind was made to hold authority over all magic. Mistral died to prevent worse ruin. Magic failed, cities fell, Netheril ended, and when Mistral was reborn from the ruins, she did not restore the world exactly as it had been. When I said she changed the rules, Nhalis corrected me. She made rules survivable. She would not comment further on Karsus than that. When I pressed her, she only shook her head and told me that it was a story for another day. The useful part, she said, is that magic has rules because once someone powerful enough behaved as though it did not. I wrote that down. This, my lord, may be the most important thing I've learned from Nhalis, particularly in Faerun. Magic is not merely power. It is power under governance. The present shape of magic is not simply how things have always been. The weave we use now is Mistra's answer to catastrophe. There are old workings, she said, that remember older rules. Mythals, Netherese remnants, dead places, wild places, ruins where spellcraft has folded in on itself. Mystra may govern magic, but not every ancient knot can simply be pulled smooth. Some must be watched, some must be worked around. Some, Nhalis suspects, would cost more to mend than even gods can spend. That thought's quite discomforting. A failed spell may burn a hand, ruin a component, frighten a mule, or leave one smelling of onions for several hours. Such things are embarrassing. They're not wounds in creation, but great workings are another matter. Battles between great and powerful casters, divine violence, rituals attempted by those with ambition exceeding judgment may leave marks. There are places, she said, where magic behaves strangely, places where spells twist, surge, fade or fail. Places of wild magic, places of dead magic, places where the usual relationship between spellcaster and weave has been damaged, interrupted or made unreliable. Dead magic, she explained, is not merely the absence of convenience, it's what happens when the ordinary condition of spellcasting no longer hold. I tried to describe those conditions as a kind of agreement. She told me not to make poetry of it. I told her I was making theology, which she said was worse. The weave is not simply a ladder by which mortals climb toward power. It is also protection, a mercy, a set of limits imposed after the most terrible proof that limits were needed. That's why, Nhalis explained, wizardry begins in humility, even when wizards themselves often do not. A wizard studies magic because it is dangerous and the mind imprecise. Through gesture, tone, memory, and preparation, a wizard may, when practiced, tap the weave in order to bring forth desired outcomes. The wiser the practitioner, the more deeply she understands how little separates a useful spell from an accident with witnesses. This also explains in part why magic is rare without being irrelevant. Books must be found, teachers persuaded, materials bought, time must be spent, and mistakes survived, and yet the world is shaped by magic all the same. Magic is not common in the same sense that bread is common or bad ale, but neither is it rare in the sense that it doesn't matter. It matters enormously and disproportionately. Over the following days, whenever rain made riding dull and walking worse, I pressed Nhalis further. She bore this with what I can only describe as admirable irritation. I asked whether her own magic came from study alone. No, she said. The answer surprised me in its bluntness, because it is not like her. Nhalis is, of course, an air genasi, which is to say, planetouched, a mortal person whose body, blood, and possibly soul carry some mark of another plane or other world. That, too, is a subject I must return to, for it is far larger than I understood. For now, let it be enough to say that Nhalis is air-touched. To her, the moving hair, the lightness of her step, the instinctive sense of pressure and wind, and the way that campfire smoke leans away when she sighs too sharply. All of these are just facts, but elemental inheritance is not the whole of her. Nhalis is not air wearing a woman's shape, but a person, a mostly human woman, if such language helps at all. The air in her is not a substitute for character, history, or pride, or ambition. The distinction matters. The realms are full of people whom the lazy describe by origin alone: elf, dwarf, genasi, orc, halfling, human. If humans ever take the time to remember that they too are a kind of people rather than the measure by which all others are explained. Such words are useful, but only until they become prisons. Her elemental nature does not, however, shape her magic. She is inclined, she told me, toward evocation. I confess that I had always thought of evocation as the dramatic school: fire, lightning, thunder, force, the sort of magic that tavern boys imitate with sticks, shouting nonsense incantations until someone loses an eye. Nhalis corrected me on this with some severity. Evocation is not about shouting at the word till it burns, she said, or not if one wishes to continue being invited indoors. She explained that evocation concerns the calling forth and shaping of energy, whether flame, cold, thunder, or their more refined cousins. In a master's hand, they may indeed level towers or turn battles. In hers, at present, it mostly dries cloaks, nudges smoke, starts fire in damp weather, or produces flashes of light bright enough to make Corvan drop a stew. Once, she admitted, it also removed her tutor's eyebrows. When I asked whether this had been by accident, she gave me a look of great seriousness. By instruction, in my opinion, he told me to commit to the gesture. I'd not laughed so freely in days. Her grandmother, she told me, claimed that her own great-great-grandmother was not mortal at all, but a great spirit from another world, a Gael, one of those radiant Eladrin whose names appear in old songs, temple carvings, and magical arguments. When I asked whether it was true, she said her first tutor considered grandmothers the leading cause of bad magical theory. When I asked what she thought, she was quiet for long enough that I wondered whether I had offended her. Then she said that something inside her answers too eagerly to light and force, and not eagerly enough to patience. I think that was the closest she came to a confession. You'll understand why this interested me. Raised as I was in the faith of Lady Firehair, I am perhaps over-inclined to see beauty, radiance, longing, and inward fire as spiritually meaningful. Nhalis is deeply suspicious of such impulses. Light is not always holy, Falrien, she told me. Sometimes it is simply hot. I've written that down too, more than once. Here lies something I'd not properly understood before. Blood, temperament, and ancestry all shape the practitioner surely as much as ink shapes a spellbook. Nhalis is not a sorcerer, she was firm on that point. A sorcerer, she told me, is what happens when magic lives inside a person before the person knows what to do with it. A wizard learns what to do before touching too much of it. She knows a handful of spells well, several more poorly, and a great many in theory. She has a large spellbook wrapped in oilcloth and guarded with more tenderness than she shows any living person, though perhaps not the tressym. Though I suspect she is fonder of us than she lets on. By the 9th day, I'd filled several pages of notes with more questions than answers. That, I've come to think, is usually a sign of a subject worth pursuing. So, for clarity, my lord, here is the little I think I now understand. Magic is real power, not merely superstition. The weave is the great structure through which that power may be safely shaped by mortal spellcasters. All magic may touch the weave, but not all spellcasters touch it in the same way. Mystra governs and preserves the present weave, which is not simply the old weave restored, but a new ordering made after catastrophe. Wizard is the learned craft of manipulating the weave through study, preparation and discipline. Divine magic is not wizardry with incense, but power granted or authorized through a different relationship. Sorcery is not mere laziness, but magic rooted in the self long before training begins. That, I think, is a great deal to learn from 9 days of rain. Then at last the trees began to fail. Not in the natural fashion, by stream or change of soil, nor with the clean edge of worked woodland. Rather they thinned abruptly, irregularly, as though beaten back by long habit. There were stumps, both old and fresh, scrub cut low, bramble burned away in patches, and here and there the look of ground that had been won, lost and won again. It brought me to mind, absurdly perhaps, of those old fields where lords refight ancient battles in summer pageants, trampling the same earth year after year until no grass grows quite right. So it was here. The forest had not ended, it had been held off. We travelled through that broken margin for the better part of a day before the land opened at last into something like prairie. The change was not sudden, but it was unmistakable. The sky widened, the air moved more freely. The road, such as it was, ceased to struggle quite so stubbornly beneath the wheels. Even the beasts felt it. The horses leaned more willingly into their harnesses. The drivers spoke with a little more life. The whole company seemed, without quite admitting it, to breathe more easily. Travel, I discovered, accelerates remarkably when the land no longer resists it. But another full day passed before I saw smoke. I'm looking at that smoke now. A small crofters' settlement, apparently, half a day from Kheldell. I remember thinking, with some embarrassment, that I had begun to suspect mankind had simply forgotten this quarter of the world entirely. So when those thin, ordered threads of smoke rose against the evening sky, I felt a degree of relief wholly disproportionate to whatever yet may lie ahead. Corvan has cautioned me not to build Kheldell too grandly in my mind. It is not, he says, by any generous measure a grand place. But there will be roofs, beds, walls. For now there is smoke, and after so many days of wet road and unanswered questions, that is wonder enough. Nhalis, of course, told me not to misuse the word. Until my next letter, my lord, I remain as ever your devoted correspondent, Falrien Sunesson.